It's a miracle we're still here. Denis was a teacher, and back in 2008, my work as an engineer took us on assignment to Texas. If you told us then that we were both going to be horribly injured in a road accident and that we'd both lose our left legs above the knee, we would have been absolutely convinced that we could not have coped. We're Chris and Denis Arthey, and we're excited that our book is finally here, Highway 35.
In our book, we tried to be open and honest about the accident, our life-changing injuries, and coping with disability. We've also reflected on the things that helped us survive and put our lives back together again. Things like the amazing support we received from family, friends, neighbours, and our church. The importance of making good choices every day, and particularly the decision to persevere. The gritty and difficult subject of forgiveness, and of course, the central role our faith played.
We wrote this book because we know that life doesn't always go to plan. There are bumps in the road, some worse than others, and some a lot worse than ours. But whatever you're facing, it's our prayer that Highway 35 will help you to meet disaster head-on with hope.
Thank you so much for the invitation to come and speak, Rob, and for that wonderful introduction, Jeremy and Heather. You guys can worship up here. That was just marvelous. If we could have the next slide, which is blank, that's great. We're very pleased to be here. We're going to share the speaking this evening, and you'll soon find out that Denis is a very special person indeed. Shortly after our accident, which was in 2008, we celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary. And more recently, we celebrated our 45th wedding anniversary. So 15 years that we almost never had. Also, after the accident, we spent many hours together in hospitals and in doctors' waiting rooms, doing physical therapy exercises in the gym, and recovering at home. And we found that actually we're still best friends. And from my perspective, there's no one else on the planet I would rather spend my time with. We're so thankful that we both survived the accident and that we still have each other. But enough of these introductions. You're probably wondering, well, what exactly did happen to these two people? And more importantly, what can we learn from it? And this is where it matters to all of you. What can we learn from it that's of value to all of us as we live our lives? Well, in order to do that, I need to speak a little bit about motorcycling. I've always loved motorbikes. I was on a motorcycle on my 16th birthday, which is the earliest you can legally ride in the UK. And I've owned and ridden machines of various sizes over the years. And one of my lifelong ambitions was always to ride motorcycle road trips in the USA. And then in 2007, I got my chance when my employer offered me a 3-year work assignment based in Houston, Texas. So at the end of 2007, the two of us relocated from leafy Surrey to the concrete and glass jungle of the world's oil capital in Houston, Texas. And a few months after we arrived, we were exploring our new surroundings on a motorcycle. We were exploring southwest Texas down the Gulf Coast towards the Mexico border and the Rio Grande, and our destination was the city of Corpus Christi. It was the 16th of May, 2008. If we could have the next photo. This is the machine that we crashed. It was a 2008 Harley-Davidson FLHR Road King with their 96 cubic inch, 1600cc V-twin engine. I'm sort of picking up messages that maybe not everybody in the room is as keen on motorcycles as I am. So stop talking about the bike, Chris, or we'll be here all evening. Enough to say it was a superb touring machine. This photo was actually taken the evening before our crash, and we were living the dream. So the next day on our road trip, we were on Highway 35 at 2:30 in the afternoon. At that point, although our destination was the city of Corpus Christi, at that point Highway 35 is a typical rural Gulf Coast road. So dead straight road, dead flat, a two-laner, so one lane of traffic going in each direction, and a 70-mile-an-hour speed limit. We were traveling at 55 miles an hour, and Denis was on the pillion. It was a beautiful spring day, clear blue sky, dry roads, and light traffic on a weekday afternoon, and bam! If we have the next picture, that's fine. We don't have any recollection of the accident, which is probably a good thing, but there was a reconstruction just over a year later in a small town Texas courtroom in the county where the accident happened. And it went something like this. I was riding the Harley, 55 as I said, Denis on the pillion, 55 in a 70-mile-an-hour limit. A young truck driver in an F-150 truck came up behind us. 55 wasn't quite fast enough for him, so he overtakes safely to our left. You remember we're on the right-hand side of the road in the States. So he completes his overtaking maneuver, and now I'm looking at the back of a big Ford truck. The truck driver notices that there's a red vehicle coming at him at high speed on the wrong side of the road. He's thinking, is he asleep at the wheel? Is he on the phone? Is he going to get back in his own lane? No, he's not. So at the last moment, the truck driver drives off the road. Now I can see the red vehicle, which is coming at me at over 80 miles an hour. I'm doing 55, so we've got a combined closing speed of over 135 miles an hour. Things are happening at 60 meters a second. No time to react. And he hits us head on. The next vehicle behind us was another truck. It was a white Chevrolet, driver with his wife on board. They see the impact, this explosion of motorcycle parts, two bodies flying through the air like rag dolls. The red vehicle goes back on the correct side of the road. The white truck driver hits the brakes to slow down and stop for the accident. And then the red vehicle comes over and hits the white truck, almost kills the driver, and severely injures his wife. We have the next picture. This is the red vehicle that hit us. You can see that it caught fire. They pulled the driver from the wreckage. He was severely injured, but he survived. And you can see the orange spray paint on the grass because the police thought there was going to be a fatal accident inquiry. The next photo. This is the white truck that was behind us. Now remember, he was slowing down to stop for the accident before he was struck. But even so, that fence on the right-hand side is about 20 meters off the road. That's how far he was bounced by the impact. And on the left, you can see a couple of figures standing over what was left of the Harley Davidson. We'd been taken away by that point. Okay, the next picture. This is what was left of the Harley, with our belongings scattered around it. Again, you can see the orange spray paint. This is the good side of the bike. And the next one, This is the other side of the bike. If you know anything about motorcycles, the first thing you'll notice is that the left fork holding the front wheel is not there anymore. There's no pannier or exhaust pipe on the left-hand side anymore. The crash bar is bent back against the engine. And of course, that's the side of the bike where our left legs were. The next one's blank, please. Yeah. It turned out that the driver of the red vehicle was over 3 times the drink drive limit at 2:30 in the afternoon on a weekday. The limit in Texas is the same as it is over here in the UK, which is 80 milligrams of alcohol per 100 milliliters of blood. So the limit is 80, and he was at 250, which is the equivalent of 2.5 to 3 bottles of wine, or in his case, over half a litre of whiskey. For further context, the limit is 80, he was at 250, 350 is the equivalent of a general anaesthetic in hospital. Now, at this point, I left planet Earth to go and live somewhere else for quite some time, so I'll let Denis take up the story.
Right, you're going to have to forgive me if I just pretend that you are a room full of 6- and 7-year-olds, and as a teacher, I will relax. The truck driver said that Chris would have had less than half a second to react. We were both terribly injured, as you can imagine. We were taken in his and hers helicopters to the nearest trauma hospital at Corpus Christi. We both had severely crushed left legs. Mine had to be amputated straight away. We both had broken left arms and hands. My arm was what they call degloved because I lost a lot of skin. We flew through the air, so we landed on our heads. So we both had concussion, although Chris's was a lot worse than mine. And because Chris was at the front of the bike, he got the internal injuries. So he had a punctured lung, broken ribs, ruptured spleen. So Chris was in intensive care for over 2 weeks, most of that time in a medically induced coma. I got out of intensive care in less than a week. But I came to in a hospital bed, now looking down at flat bedclothes where my left leg should be. I've got a huge, heavy plaster cast on my left arm. I can't move. I'm in a lot of pain. I know Chris is more seriously injured. I just don't know how badly. And we often describe it to people as like a nightmare that you wake up to. You know, usually you go to sleep, you might have a nightmare, but in the morning, it was just a bad dream. But we were waking up to like a daily nightmare scenario. Just a word of warning, next few slides are a bit more graphic. Next slide, please. This is Chris, 2 days after the crash, in the medically induced coma, and he's fighting for his life. You can see the blue tubes of the ventilator. He's still got his left leg at this stage because they were trying to save it. There's a metal bar around it. And the gentleman in the hoop shirt standing over the bed is our American pastor, Pastor Frankie. But after 10 days, the leg was killing Chris. So our eldest son and I signed for his amputation. Well, that night, I lay in bed. I was worrying, praying, worrying. I mean, it's not a good combination, is it? And would Chris make it through the operation? He was so weak. And if he did make it through the operation, would he agree with the decision that we'd now taken for him? But the amputation marked the start of his recovery.
We'll have the next slide, please, which is blank. Yeah.
As soon as Chris's employer heard the news, his manager cleared for our 3 youngsters to fly out to the States. If you were here this morning, you saw a picture of them all. We've got 2 sons and a daughter. At the time, Ben was 25, Tom was 22, Miriam was just 18 and in her first year at university. They embarked on a 10-hour flight to Houston, not knowing how many parents they were going to have when they arrived. Chris's company were amazing. They organised and paid for hotel, hire car, mobile phone, even gave our youngsters spending money and said, just stay until your parents are out of danger. After a month, we were well enough to move to the rehabilitation hospital near Houston, where we lived. Next slide, please. We did lots of therapy. I mean, here we are sharing an exercise table. You can see they've put weights on our good legs, and you do lots and lots of lifting exercises. That leg's got to be really strong for when you start walking with the prosthetic. Both had further arm surgery, but we were both home 2.5 months after the crash. Next slide. This is poor Chris, please, sorry. Next slide. This is Chris when he got home.
Oh, no.
No, sorry.
Back one.
Back one.
That's it.
This was poor Chris when he got home. His weight had fallen to 53 kilograms. Old school, that's less than 8.5 stone. Now you can see the scar up his abdomen. That's where they took the spleen. He assures me that he counted 54 metal staples when they took them out. You can see the white bandage on his right thigh. That's covering his donor site. That's where they took skin to graft onto his stump. Now, my donor site is bigger because I needed skin for my stump, but also my arm. And we found that the donor site took the longest to heal. It's a bit like a burn. Next slide, please. Much happier. As Jeremy said, we were smiling in our wheelchairs. You can see how red, we might be able to see how red my forearm is. That's the new skin graft, took brilliantly. And Chris has had some work done on his fingers and left elbow. We continued with outpatient therapy. 4-month mark, really exciting. We got our first prosthetic legs. But then you've got to learn to keep them on all day and to walk with them. When Chris could walk 50 metres with a stick, the company doctor said, you can come back to work part-time. Outpatient therapy lasted to the 9-month mark. And then we decided we'd better do a year of chiropractic therapy because we landed on our heads, so our spines were damaged.
So that's what happened to us. But as I said earlier, of more importance is, well, what do we think this has told us, which is of value to all of us as we try and live our lives? And we think we've got a number of things to say. The first thing we would say, I would take the next, which is blank. The first thing we would say is that miracles still happen. Yeah? We had an email a few months after the crash from one of the state troopers who attended the scene. And he was an experienced police officer. He'd seen a lot of road traffic accidents, a lot of injuries. And he wrote that he'd seen the extent of our injuries. And then later on, he'd heard that we survived. And he wrote that he couldn't believe it. It was a miracle. And in our case, a large part of the miracle was the speed of the first responders. There was an emergency call. Police were there within 15 minutes, and they joined volunteer fire crew who were already working at the scene. In 24 minutes, 2 ambulances that had been scrambled from the nearest hospital arrived fully crewed with paramedics. And in less than an hour, we were both on these life flight helicopters to the nearest trauma hospital, which was only 60 miles away, which is not that far by helicopter. First responders often talk about the golden hour. If things go well in the first hour after an incident, then the chances of survival and recovery are dramatically different. And in our case, the golden hour ran on rails. So, first point, miracles still happen. Watch out for them. The next thing we would say is an obvious one that was underlined for us, and that is that motor vehicles are potentially lethal weapons. Our roads here in the UK are amongst the safest roads in the world. They're about twice as safe as the roads in Texas. And that's per mile traveled. And they drive a lot of miles in Texas. But even so, in the UK, we have about 1,800 road deaths each year, which averages 5 people killed on our roads every day, which is a statistic that we're often unaware of, probably because road accidents don't sell newspapers. But we become aware of it if it happens to somebody who's close to us. So, of course, one of our messages to you is that when we're behind the wheel of these lethal weapons, it requires our full attention, no distractions. We all know about not driving if we're not fit to do so, not talking on the mobile phone when we're driving. But it's everything else. You know, the speed limits are there for a reason, so are the mirrors and the indicators and the seat belts. Expect other road users to do unexpected things. I see a lot of nodding heads around here. They do, don't they? So expect them to do unexpected things. So please, full attention, no distractions. The next point we would make, and we hope that we're much better at this since our accident, is how important it is to intervene if you see something crazy happening. Our drunk driver was trying to drive home after having been on a fishing trip. So he'd been on a boat all morning with other people who'd seen him drinking heavily. And other people will have seen him arrive back at the dock, inebriated, climbing into his car to try and drive home. We heard in the courtroom that witnesses had seen him driving very erratically on Highway 35 for several miles. And he's speeding right up, and he slowed right down again, and now he's on the wrong side of the road, and he's back on the right side of the road. Now he's on the wrong side of the road again, and there's an 18-wheeler coming. Is he going to make it? Oh, he's just made it. Somebody's going to get killed or seriously injured. But nobody did anything. Nobody stopped him. Nobody made a phone call. Nobody raised the alarm, which left us thinking, why is this so difficult? Well, we think the answer is found in the Bible. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 25 says, fear of man will prove to be a trap. And it's true. We see something daft happening, and we feel that we ought to say something, but fear of man, we're frightened of what people might think or what they might say or what they might do. So it's easier for us to keep our opinions to ourselves. And most of the time we get lucky. The situation resolves, nobody gets hurt. But if we carry on not intervening, sooner or later there will be a bullet in the chamber, and the accident happens and lives are changed or lost. So a message to you is that if you see something daft happening, and as I say, I hope we're much better at this now, whether it's somebody talking on the phone when they're driving or trying to climb an unsecured ladder, be the brave one to point this out. And you don't have to be rude about it. Is this a good idea? Have you thought this through? That may be all that's necessary to make the difference between life and death. So please be the brave ones to intervene. I'll have the next photo. There are two reasons for showing this photo. One is I like to brag. I was a marathon runner before the accident, and this was the Austin, Texas half marathon just a few weeks before our crash, and I took an age group 5th place. But the other reason for showing the photo is to emphasize that being physically fit can not only give you life, I loved training and racing, but it can also save your life. I was training and racing about 35 miles a week right up to the crash. Denis was slim and fit, and still is. There you go. Yes, thank you, she is. And Denis was exercising every morning and walking regularly with friends. The doctors in the trauma hospital and in the rehab hospital said that our survival and our rapid rate of recovery was a direct result of the fact that we were in good nick physically before the accident happened. Now, endurance sports is not everyone's cup of tea. I quite understand that. But it is worth thinking about that a basic level of physical fitness can make all the difference when bad things happen, because fit people are harder to kill.
Things are much better if you've got a good support structure, friends
the next
around
slide,
you.
please.
But of course, being in a church, you've got a caring family around you. And that's what we discovered. As soon as the news broke, the US church, 4 or 5 carloads were travelling down to Corpus Christi to visit us. The UK church, they arranged flights for our youngsters and drove them to the airport. Perhaps more surprisingly, we've been in our house 5 months. Next door neighbours dropped everything, picked up our 3 from Houston Airport, drove them to Corpus Christi. That is a 4-hour drive, and they stayed overnight. The pastor, who actually was only 30 at the time, he made a trip every week down to Corpus. He made 4 trips in all, and also stayed overnight. Now, I got out of hospital eventually before Chris. And as Chris said, I was walking with the next door neighbour and her best friend, who was an ex-nurse. She said, "Do not worry, I will come and stay with you." And she did for 2 weeks, until Chris got out of hospital. The neighbours, friends and church, that was really interesting. They all got together, like sort of help the Arthey project. And they produced this amazing rota. They brought us meals every night. They arranged transport to and from hospitals, doctor's appointments. They even arranged for help around the house, housework. We did have to change the meal rota. This was Texas. The meals were enormous. There was a gentleman in the church called Doug, and he was a building contractor. And he said, "Don't worry, I'll do all the modifications to your house." So he built a wheelchair ramp up to the front door. He widened the family bathroom doorway so we could get through. And he put up support rails. Church paid for all the materials, and Doug offered his labour free of charge. We had lots of prayer. I mean, I can't tell you, it was just tangible. We knew people were thinking of us, praying for us. It was like being lifted above the circumstances. Now, I'm going to read a tiny bit of the book, because during this time, God provided a revelation of truth and hope from an unexpected source. My room looks like a florist's shop. I offer some of the flowers to the nurses' station. Each day brings a fresh batch of uplifting cards too. I never knew we had so many friends. A large brown envelope arrives. Inside are letters from the Year 2 children, the 6 and 7-year-olds at Whitley Infant School back in England. There's also a card from the classroom teacher I'd worked with for years. I am overwhelmed by the sentiments they express. A little girl in this class has written, "Dear Mrs. Arthey, I was so sad to hear about your bad crash. I hope you don't have another one." Direct and to the point, as only a child can be. Even in my present state, the words make me laugh. I know what she means. Later, a friend brings another large envelope. This one is full of cards from the kindergarten class where I was volunteering in the Woodlands. Each card is very similar. In my mind's eye, I can just see the words written on the board at the front of the class for the children to copy. "We miss you. Get better soon." The cards are covered in a bright assortment of stickers and patterns. One card stands out. It's from a little girl I remember well, and inside it, quite independently, she has written, "Do you see a rainbow?" And on the back is a beautifully coloured rainbow. How do children always get to the heart of the matter? A lump forms in my throat and my spirit jumps.
Another thing that we've learned is that it's not possible for us to understand everything. This is the why me question. Why me? Why us? I like to think I was a careful motorcyclist. I'd never crashed a machine before in my life. I'd been on these safe rider courses with the British Motorcycle Police where you ride your bike and you're followed by a police motorcyclist for about 20 minutes, and then you stop and he does a critique of your riding style. This is what you do well, these are the things you need to watch out for. And then you do it again and again. And through these cycles you become a safer, more competent rider. So I've done all that. I've never had a speeding ticket in my life, either on a motorcycle or in a car. I did get a parking ticket once, but it was a number of years ago. We were on our honeymoon, and I think I must have been distracted. And this was a well-planned trip. We had the right gear on. We had crash helmets, eye shields, leather gloves, leather jackets, stout boots. We had a route planned. We weren't in any hurry, 55 in a 70 limit. We were stopping frequently for breaks so we didn't get tired. And why would this happen in the thousands of miles, tens of thousands of miles I've ridden on motorcycles? Why would this happen on the rare occasion when I got my precious wife on the pillion? Well, I have this list. It's the list of things that Chris does not understand. And this why me, why us question is up there at the top of the list. Because when it's my turn to go to the pearly gates, I'm taking that list with me. I want some answers. I have a feeling that when I get there, I'll toss the list away because then it won't matter anymore. But for now, that list is important to me. We all know the scripture in Corinthians, now we see but a poor reflection, then we shall see face to face. Now I know only in part, then I shall know fully, even as I'm fully known. But until that, I'm hanging on to the list because it reminds me that we can't expect to understand everything.
So some things we learnt you just have to let go of. Other things, though, were within our control. And we learnt the importance of perseverance, particularly through therapy. After the surgery to our hands and arms, we had to work really hard at getting full range of motion back. That was particularly painful and often very discouraging. Have the next slide, please. These sort of Star Wars contraptions are called Denis splints. And we used to wear them 30 minutes, 3 times a day. And they are designed to stretch your hand in a rotated position to improve what's called supination or pronation. And we soon discovered, if you can't move, that, if you try and carry a plate full of food, if you can't supinate properly, it's really hard. If you want to have a shower, or you want to wash your hair, you can imagine the shower gel, the shampoo just falls straight off your hand unless you tip sideways. If you can't pronate properly, you can't use a computer keyboard, or in my case, play the piano. They used to say to us, make a fist. That's all we could do. And it used to take 10 minutes to use the other hand to force a finger down onto the palm of our hand. Something you ought to know about us, we are highly, highly competitive. So we used to sit at home in the evening watching a film and doing our exercises. And the film would just be interspersed with cries of, I've got 2 fingers down. I added up all the exercises we were doing, both in outpatients and at home. It came to up to 4 hours every day. We had to eat, we had to sleep, and we did a lot of sleeping. But you have to stick at therapy, even if it feels hopeless. Just in the Christian walk, you know how you have to sometimes lean on the encouraging faith of others. We just put our faith in the faith of the therapists, and we got it all back. Absolutely.
The next slide. You probably realise that if you have an accident like ours, all sense of dignity departs. And we found how important it is to have a good sense of humour. And to illustrate, I've got this next photo. This is the gear I had to wear when they made the casting for the socket on my first prosthetic leg. And you can see by the look on Denise's face that she's very amused by these high fashion items that I'm wearing. But don't worry, because half an hour later, it was Denise's turn to wear similar high fashion items. And Denise is very pleased that I don't have a photo of that. But I do have this photo, if you have the next one. This was taken just a few seconds after Denise stood up out of the wheelchair for the first time on her new prosthetic leg. What was that like?
Do you know, it's really hard to put into words what an emotional moment that was. It caught me by surprise. After months in a wheelchair, to be standing upright again on two legs was just incredible.
Okay, the next one, which is blank. Yeah. It's also really apparent to us how important it is to have a hope and a future, to know why you're here. We'll have the next photo. This is the two of us walking back into church for the first time on our new prosthetic legs. Now, okay, Denise has got the walking frame. I'm using a walking stick. You can see Denise has had some more arm surgery. But we are walking independently into church.
Right, I'm going to interrupt, Chris, because you won't believe the first song the worship team chose. I'm Still Standing.
Yeah. Psalm 124 has become our theme tune, and that's the one that says, if the Lord had not been on our side, then things would have overwhelmed us. But because he's on our side, it's as if the net has been broken and we've escaped. Like a bird out of the fowler's snare, the snare is broken and we're free. We could have died in the accident. We nearly did. In our case, it would have been fine because we both loved the Lord, we knew where we were going, and there was no pain, no memory of the accident. We would have been straight there. We were a popular couple in our mid-50s. People would have said nice things about us. They would have put flowers on our graves. But it would have been awful for the youngsters. And what about the assignment on our lives? We have to believe that the only reason we possibly survived is because the assignment that we have isn't finished yet. Now, it may not be the assignment that we originally had in mind. It may be more along the lines of what we're doing this evening, which is the two of us working together, talking to people, and trying to help them to understand that even if really bad things happen, you don't have to be under the circumstances, but you can rise above them, and how that's possible.
If you'd told us beforehand what was going to happen, well, I wouldn't have got on the plane. And we would have probably said that we wouldn't have thought that our faith would have held up. But you know, from the moment we surfaced in a hospital room, we were so aware of God's presence in the room with us. It felt like everything had been stripped away, but the Lord remained. It's just like he promised. He never let us go. And I can remember one day, Chris came up to, because I was on the top floor, came up to my ward in his wheelchair. He got tears in his eyes, was streaming down his face. And he looked down at his body, waved his good arm over it, and he said, you know, this reminds me, Jesus' body was broken for us. And suddenly it hit us, you know, it wasn't just that Jesus, our Lord, was with us in that hospital. It's the fact that because he had suffered, he knew and understood pain, suffering, you know, injustice that we were feeling, frustration that we were feeling. And that was so comforting. The other thing that happened, I suddenly started remembering all these scriptures that I didn't even know I knew. You know, I probably learned them in Sunday school or in youth work or doing Bible study. And one in particular was Romans 8:28. All things work together for good, for those who love God and accord according to his purposes. And it was like, you know, hang on to that with white knuckles. And I decided, even though I was pretty weak with morphine and what was happening, that I was going to try and write it out. So I think it took 6 attempts till it looked like a 6-year-old's writing, but it was okay. I gave it to Frankie. I said, would you please read this over Chris in the coma? Would you stick it up in his room? Somehow I wanted that declared over him in that room. And all things have worked together for good.
Next slide, please. Blank. Yep.
For a number of years, the first thing we would see in the morning was the wheelchair beside the bed. That's the first choice of the day. You have to get up, get in the wheelchair, start moving around. And we found that each day was just a series of choices. If you put enough good choices together in a row, you get a good day. Enough good days together in a row, you get a good week. If you carry on like that, you can build a good life again. Now, there was one really important, huge choice facing us, and that was forgiveness. After the sentencing trial, which was a year after the crash, the drunk driver asked the judge if he could come over and speak to us. He came over the courtroom, he got tears in his eyes, and he said, "Look, I can't give you your legs back. I'm so terribly sorry for what I did to you. Can you possibly forgive me?" Now, surprisingly, we searched our hearts. We never felt any bitterness towards him. And that really helped us put all our energy into recovering. We had enough on our plates. We didn't want to go down the hatred, bitterness route, because it would have affected us badly. And so we told him, yes, we forgave you when we were in hospital. He got a short prison sentence, 4 months, followed by 10 years probation. And as far as we know, he never lost his driving license. Well, that was a shock. We decided we were going to keep in touch with him. So we visited him when he was in prison. We exchange emails, even now, every 6 months. And at the end of 2012, we were leaving the States, and he asked to see us again. So he had lunch. We all had lunch together, him and his wife. And we were able to reassure him that as far as we were concerned, he was forgiven. In 2019, he wrote us an amazing email. He said, "Thank you so much for your kindness and support, because it's helped me cope emotionally over the years." And in 2022, we went back to Texas and again had a meal with him and his wife. And they were amazing company. And right at the end of the meal, he surprised us. He said, "Well, when you're next in Texas, please come and stay with us at our house." We are still discovering the remarkable power of forgiveness. It freed us up, it freed him up.
They say that on a scale of difficulty from 1 to 10, today's problems are always a 10. So how difficult is it living life with one leg each? Well, for us, on a scale of 1 to 10, that's a 10. But we do understand that we're not the only ones who are facing difficulties. Whatever it is that you're facing today, on that scale, that's a 10. Now, we're not going to do this, but we're fairly sure that if we went round the room, we would find people who are suffering from physical illness or incapacity, mental illness, worries about relationships, finances, addictions. And for you, whatever it is you're facing, on a scale of 1 to 10, that's a 10. It's a different 10, but it's still a 10. In John 16:33, Jesus himself said, "In this world you will have trouble." Not you might have trouble, you will have trouble. So if you're not having trouble today, watch out for it. But then, of course, he goes on to say, "But take heart, I've overcome the world." That's not quite the end of our story. If we have the next slide. Yeah, a year and a half after the crash, I took delivery of my first running leg, which is here. It's one of these carbon fiber spring Blade Runner legs, and I started to run again. I found initially that I could only run a few yards before I was totally puffed out because I was so out of condition. And I fell over a lot, which wasn't fun. But I signed up straight away for my first 5-kilometer race as an amputee against a field of able-bodied competitors. And a few weeks later, after a number of painful training sessions, I competed in that 5-kilometer, 3.1-mile race. I didn't run the whole thing. I was still taking walking breaks. But I finished in less than 50 minutes. I didn't fall down, which was a good day. And I didn't come last. And that was the beginning of a long return to endurance sports. And in this new configuration, I completed 2 full marathons. Then, next photo, I got a cycling leg. Now this one is very different. It's got a freewheeling hinge for a knee, so it doesn't offer any resistance, and it takes a shoe that clips onto the left pedal. So basically, the chap on the left is getting a free ride, while the chap on the right is doing all the hard work. So I learned to cycle again. And I joined a swim club. I found a coach who was quite intrigued by the idea of getting an amputee swimming. We discovered quite quickly that I can swim breaststroke, but every time I kick, I turn left. So we stayed with freestyle, much more effective. I can swim in a straight line. So you can imagine with the swimming, the cycling, and the running, I do triathlons. I've competed 4 times now in the British Para-Triathlon Championships. So I'm training now for my fifth attempt at the National Championships, which will be in Eton Dorney in August. And a couple of years ago, while we were back in Texas, I did a half Ironman, it was in Waco. It was another crazy stunt. This is a 1.2 mile open water swim, followed by 56 miles on the bike, and then a 13.1 mile half marathon. I completed it, got inside the cut-offs. It took me 8 hours. I'm not as fast as I used to be, but I'm not as young as I used to be either. It's just brilliant to be able to train and race again. And the next photo, as a 60th birthday and retirement present in 2016, I had a go at Kilimanjaro with our second son, Tom. You can probably work out in the photo which one I am. Tom is the 3rd one in line. He's got the pink rag on his head. And this photo was taken on day 4 of the trek, which was at the top of the Barranco Wall, which is the steepest part of the climb. It's a real hands-on scramble. So we're all smiles because we've got the wall behind us. And then the next photo is later on in the trek. So here we are at the summit. This is the highest point in Africa, just under 6,000 meters. The photo was taken at 8 o'clock in the morning. It was -5 degrees centigrade, so all the water in the packs had frozen solid, and we were breathing only half the oxygen that we're enjoying here in Banff this evening. So we took a couple of quick photographs and then went downstairs to where the air was easier to breathe. It was, I still can't believe we got away with that. It's another one of those miracles I told you to watch out for. And the next photo is 2019. I was off adventuring again, and this was a trek to Everest Base Camp. The mountain in the photo is not actually Everest, it's Amadablam, which is another beautiful Himalayan peak. We were walking past that for several days, and I think that one became my favorite. And it was just another terrific adventure, which I never would have thought possible. And the next photo, and 2 years ago, our book was released, Highway 35, Meeting Disaster Head On with Hope. And as Rob said, we've got plenty of copies at the back. We wrote the book because we know life doesn't always go to plan. There are bumps in the road. Some are worse than others, and we know that some are a lot worse than ours. But whatever it is you're facing, it's our prayer that Highway 35 would help you to meet disaster head on with hope.
So in summary, we'd say yes, we can see that rainbow that the little girl drew on her cards, because every day for us now is a gift. So thank you for listening. We're going to show a very short video, and then we're going to, if there's time, open it up for questions. We do mean any questions. I mean, we speak to a lot of audiences, including children. And I can remember being in a class of 6- and 7-year-olds when a bright spark puts his hand up at the back of the class and says, "So, how did they get the leg off?" The teacher just went, I've never seen a teacher go pale so fast. And when they got it off, what did they do with it? Is it in a grave somewhere? So I don't think you can shock us with the questions. And we'll be at the back anyway, so if you don't want to share a question out loud with everybody, we'll be at the back. And there'll be an opportunity, if you wanted us to pray for you, we'll be there. So.
Yep. And we'll have the video.
you.